Hi there and welcome back. This is the second part in a three-part video series on narcissism, and today we're going to be looking at why people who experienced childhood trauma appear to be magnetic in terms of attracting narcissists into their adult lives. So last week we had a look at narcissism in general and focused in particular on covert narcissists. Next week we're going to be looking at the question or the questions how and why someone becomes a narcissist. So why do people who experienced early trauma in their lives seem to attract narcissists into their adult relationships at a much higher rate than people who didn't experience childhood trauma? In this scenario, we're essentially talking about a relationship between two people. One of those people is a narcissist, one is a codependent. So, of course, narcissists have an inflated sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration and a lack of empathy towards others. And this may be in a very showy, very obvious way, as in overt narcissists, but it may be confined to the intimacy of a particular relationship, and outside of the home there is no sign of narcissistic traits, which is the case, of course, of covert narcissists that we talked about last time. Both covert and overt narcissists will manipulate and exploit people around them in order to have their own needs and desires met. And in both cases, they appear to attract into their lives codependent people. So let's remind ourselves of what a codependent person is. There are lots of definitions around, but I always like the simple ones. And a codependent is somebody with low self-esteem, a high need for external validation and approval, and tend to be drawn into relationships where they will be manipulated and controlled. More often than not, the traits displayed by a codependent person are actually the symptoms of childhood trauma, particularly that low self-esteem that results from that. So this is how we get this connection between narcissists and codependents, who are primarily people with childhood trauma experiences. If you were to look back at the past history of both the narcissist and the codependent, you would most likely find a history of childhood trauma or adversity. In particular, they are likely to have experienced loss and some form of abandonment. If you were able to really look inside each person, you would find in both cases deep childhood wounds and hurts, a real intense fear of being abandoned, and a low self-esteem. But the way in which these two types of personality have processed the trauma that happened to them, and the way they display it in adulthood, the way they live their trauma, is completely different. In the codependent person, you will clearly see somebody who is hurt, who is vulnerable, who is prepared to do anything in order to prove their worth and earn their place in their community, whether it's in a couple, in their family, or in the wider community. So narcissists, with their sense of self-importance, of entitlement, with their lack of empathy and their constant need for admiration, create a complete whirlwind of emotions for their partners. And yet we see that people who experienced childhood traumas gravitate towards this type of person. Why is that? If we break down the struggles of adult codependence, we find low self-esteem, trust issues, difficulties in forming healthy relationships, and a distorted sense of self. They may struggle with healthy boundaries and may not recognise healthy relationship dynamics. So there are two main reasons why a person with codependent traits may gravitate towards a narcissist. First of all, their early environment may have been chaotic. They may have had a narcissistic parent. They may have been emotionally abused. So they are familiar with all these patterns of behaviour, even if they were painful at the time, and even if they are painful in their adult relationships, there is part of our brain that feels a certain comfort when something is familiar. So having those relationship dynamics and being emotionally abused, although totally wrong and very painful, it feels familiar, and we can be magnetically drawn to those situations that we experienced in the past, good and bad. Secondly, the codependent seeks validation and love and security, and certainly at the beginning of a relationship with a narcissist, all those things will be provided, but they don't last long. That apparent structure is actually control, and the benefits that you get from that relationship come at a cost. They are conditional, not unconditional benefits, and certainly the love is not unconditional as it needs to be. So it's almost like a trap that you're drawn into, and by the time that you are in the centre of this trap or tangled up in this web, it's almost impossible to see your way out. So recognising and understanding these patterns of behaviour is the first step in breaking free from that magnetic attraction for narcissists. Once you've taken that first step, it's time to look at healing those past wounds and rebuilding your self-esteem so that you feel good enough on your own. You don't need another person to validate you. You need to continue educating yourself and surround yourself with trustworthy, empathetic people who are going to help you through this process. This may mean a good friend, a colleague, a trusted family member, or a professional therapist. If you need to create an exit strategy for yourself, then use this support network to help you do this. It's not a good idea to announce your intentions or even to plan a way of outing your narcissistic partner. You need to really focus on meeting your needs and not be using your time and energy to plan a campaign of vengeance. If you do go public, then it could backfire because the narcissist may react to this and delay your exit strategy or make it really, really difficult, sometimes impossible for you to extricate yourself from that relationship. Once you have your strategy in place, it's really important to do some deep, ongoing work on your self-esteem and self-worth, and this can be started by upping your self-care, because the likelihood is you haven't been taking great care of yourself. You've been putting your needs to the bottom of the pile. You've been serving others. In particular, you've been serving the narcissist in your life. So you can increase your self-esteem, your self-worth, your confidence by upping your self-care. And you can start really small. As you may know if you've watched my other videos, I'm a great fan of doing things in small baby steps, 10-minute chunks even. So just start giving yourself 10 minutes a day where you focus on something that is just for you. It might be watching something that you particularly like or are interested in exploring. It might be listening to some music that in the past you haven't listened to because the other person or people around you haven't wanted to listen to your taste in music. Maybe try some new food or drink. Just give yourself permission to see what's out there, and it's almost like starting again, growing yourself, giving yourself the opportunities that you didn't have as a child and you haven't had in this relationship. This is your time now, so just do it. As you rebuild your self-worth, your self-esteem, you are future-proofing yourself. You are building yourself up from the inside so that you will no longer attract narcissistic partners. Let me know if any of this has resonated with you, and if you have any questions or suggestions for future video topics, then pop them in the comments below. Until next time, bye for now.